Hello, everyone, and welcome to our fifth podcast on Hello World. We're coming into our last and final weekend of teaching. I'm here with Pastor Brett and Pastor Larry, as always, and we're talking about the story of Abraham, correct?
That is correct.
All right. So where are we going with this thing?
Well, you know, everything kind of goes together, it seems like, in the first 11 chapters of Genesis. But here we're moving into chapter 12. So really the story shifts. We no longer are dealing with ancient mythological stories. Now we're dealing with what most scholars believe is an actual historic figure. So the whole genre of literature changes right here where we are. But there is an interesting segue, and Abraham is a segue. So it's kind of fun to look at him because the beginning of the world, beginning of Adam and Eve, beginning of murder, all the different beginnings, Noah, we begin again. And here we have Abraham, the beginning of the patriarchy, the beginning of this historic figure, the beginning of Judaism, really.
Yeah.
So we're starting in chapter 12, and working our way through.
You brought a Bible today.
I know.
No computer.
Well, you know, I have a lot of stuff memorized on this book.
Yeah.
Because I've had this one for a long time.
You have it memorized on the book?
Well, in my mind, I have places in the page memorized, and it's hard for me to find the places memorized on the computer. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So that's why I brought it today, because there's several things going on here. There's no possible way we could ever do justice to what we're looking at in 1 week.
Yeah.
This is a 6 or 8 week series just in Abraham.
Well, I know when we first talked about it, I had suggested that we touch on Abraham as kind of the close to the Genesis story, and everybody was pretty against me for that.
Yeah.
But yet we're doing it. So how are you going to approach it? What's your plan?
Well, usually I think about what you say, and then after a while I realize, I probably should do what you want me to do. That's kind of the way it goes.
It's wisdom. So how are you going to approach it? What's the plan?
I think today we're just going to deal with this week we're going to deal with the initial parts. We're not going to really get into a lot of Abraham's life, but we'll deal with the concept of the call. I think, and just to give a little background, and then we'll jump into just a very initial part. At least that's what I'm planning on doing this weekend. But I think it starts off where, he's all the lineage from Noah to his dad, Terah. And he was basically, according to scholarship, they think that Abraham's father was a moon worshiper. But he left the land of Ur of the Chaldees, and he was challenged to go to Canaan. But he get to Haran, and he stopped there. And he liked it there, and they lived there, and he died there. And then Abraham picks up the call of his dad. So it seems the same call comes to him and says, hey, I want you to go to Canaan. And that's really the call, the beginning of the whole thing. And this is in chapter 12. It says, hey, Abraham, leave your country, your people, your father's household, and go to the land I will show you. And the Hebrew word there really means leave the place of your birth. So you're leaving behind a lot of old baggage. And there's a lot of, and then he says, I will make you a great nation and bless you, which I think is important in this whole thing. So Brett, what do you see there?
I'm gonna call on Jordan Peterson.
He's not here.
I was gonna say, I don't know what time it is in Canada, but
no, I think he has some really good stuff in there. And I particularly liked that lecture because he admits his lack of theological education.
Yeah.
So he starts off real humble, and but in any case, what he points out psychologically from the story is, you got to get up and you got to go. You got to move forward. If you're not moving forward, you're moving backward because nothing is static.
Right.
And so he's being called. He points out. He says, it's about time for him to get out of his father's house anyway. He's like 75 years old. So
yeah.
So, and then the deal that God makes with him is not only significant for him, but it's I'm going to make you a great nation, which is what mattered because that was kind of like their concept of immortality, and. But he also says this isn't it. You're going to be a blessing to the nations, to all people, and that fits with his name as well. So, which means father of many nations.
Well, his name was Abram.
Abram at first,
At first, and then when does it change to Abraham?
I'm not exactly sure.
Chapter 15, maybe.
Yeah, we can find that quickly, but I think it's right after the the covenant.
So what was the significance of the name change?
Well, one seems to be a smaller group, and the other seems to be a father of nations. It's interesting in Hebrew, the M at the end of the word, like it was Abram, but Abrim would mean plural. So, it's when you say the Nabi is the prophet, but the Nabim is prophets.
Okay.
So you get the Eem instead of an S like we have in English. It's M. So it's really interesting to me. It's Abraham. So it's Abram. Now it's Abraham. So it's almost, it puts the little ha in the middle and adds the M. So it's one is you're going to be blessed, but I'm going to make you even. It's an expanded name.
Okay.
So
that makes sense.
It gives him more power. It gives him more credibility. But really, in the Abrahamic covenant, which you hit on, we're really not in the covenant, but he still makes the promise. I'm going to give you 3 things. First thing I'm going to give you is descendants. You're going to have as many descendants as you can imagine. As the sand of the sea or stars in the sky, as the grains of dirt there are, you're going to have a lot of descendants. And in the ancient language, in the Old Testament, this is the concept of afterlife. Mm-hmm. There was no concept of heaven like we have in the New Testament. This was their concept. You want to live on, you have a lot of kids, and you live on. But he says, I'm going to give you your greatest inheritance is going to be your kids. The second thing is or your descendants. Second thing is you're going to have this land. And later he says, I'm going to give you the land, and I want you to walk the length and breadth of it, because it's almost like a surveyor. You have to walk both sides to really understand how much of this land you get. And thirdly, I'm going to make you a blessing to the nations, to the world. And it is interesting that out of those promises that he made to Abraham, even history will say they've all been true. The Jewish nation is based from Abraham. They are so many, and the Jewish nation has seemed to be a blessing to many cultures throughout history, mm-hmm. not necessarily to Nazi Germany, but to many cultures they have been. And lastly, I think that you're going to have this land, and there's something about owning land was very important. If you're a nomadic people, you have shepherds. You're usually going from acreage to acreage, but now you own it. It's a different concept, and you have to have a family structure and then a government structure, and all those things were coming. But this is kind of the initial stages. Hey, this is what's going to happen now. But I need to also tell you that these oral stories went for generations before they finally wrote them down. And sometimes when you look back through and tell a story, it's easy to fulfill the story because you already know what's already happened.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So, and that's just an honest understanding mm-hmm. of the way the biblical text is put together.
For sure.
So what's the significance of the call? You started talking about that, and it's kind of in the early part of this story. Why is it that Abraham is called out to leave?
Well, it's not an untypical story. This is what Joseph Campbell calls the hero's motif. And Abraham, like other heroes and other stories, he's called out of what he's used to step into the unknown. And the reason that we're encouraged to do that by these stories, even though this is probably a story in history, at least to some degree, like you said, we're called to do that because there's no progress if you don't do that. So even though you're stepping into something that's unknown, it's scary. You also know deep down inside that that's where there are treasures there that I can't get if I don't go there. Mm-hmm. There are things that are good for me and for others.
Right.
That if I don't go in there, I'm not going to get those.
Well, another place he says when he's walking the land, and a few chapters down the way, when Lot and he separate, and Lot says, I want to take the well-watered Jordan Valley, which he did, which, interesting, left Abraham with Canaan, which is what he was supposed to do anyway. And the Lord said, lift up your eyes and look. And I think the concept of lifting up your eyes goes with the call. Look beyond yourself. If you really want to achieve things in life, if you're okay with just the way your life is, day after day after day, come on, there's going to be issues for you. We are people of aspiration, people who dream big dreams. I have a personal story in this area that fits for me, and I'll talk about it a little bit this weekend. But and some church people made a lot out of this. When the call of God is upon your life, now I think sometimes it gets a little creepy to say that, but when you have this aspiration that comes from somewhere transcendent beyond me, and you see that, and you aspire to do it, and in the story, I think you see that archetypal motif where he is called out to greatness, mm-hmm. but into the unknown. But he does make that trip, and he steps away from Haran and heads toward Canaan, and I think that in the life of humanity, even starting a Suncoast, I would tell you there's a point in my life where I really felt like I was being called out of where I was a local church pastor, and I went into sales. It's kind of, I need to get away from this, but I felt like I was called out of where I was making excellent income. I was doing very well in this new profession, but I was being called out to this higher level of living for me. This was what I was created to do.
Exactly what I was going to say, higher level of living.
Yeah. And I think and I want to be the best possible version of me that I can, and I can't do that if I stay in my room all the time. I have to get out and see what's on the horizon and aim high, as he says, and even if you miss, guess what? You're aiming high, and we may never hit exactly on target, but it's better to aim high and miss than to never aim.
Yeah. And that's another common thing in these stories. They're always looking up. The story in Abraham says, lift up your eyes, because your aim has to be higher than you are.
No, I think that's now there's a few details in the story I love to point out, and I'll point these out this weekend. One is that there's the concept of he gets there and he goes to these great trees, the tree of Moreh, and then he goes later to the tree of Mamre. And then so throughout history there's these big trees that were anchors of their journey, and he built an altar at Moreh.
Did you ever go there?
It's
Mamre?
And Mamre. I've been in the vicinity, but I never went to where they think it was, because I don't know they know exactly where it is.
That tree is so weird.
It's in Shechem.
What's it called? I can look it
They
up.
have all these supports,
the tree of Moreh,
underneath it and everything, because the legend is that this is actually the great tree of Mamre. So
yeah, well, the tree of Moreh was up in Beth. No, I was in the Shechem, Moreh, and the tree of Mamre. I think I got that right. I could have it backwards, but the tree of Moreh is in the north.
Google. Oh, sorry.
But the tree
for those that are watching, you can
see the really old one on the right.
tell me.
Actually on the far left, my left. Up, no.
I think left and right stay the same no matter
Right
where.
there.
This one?
Yep.
This guy?
Yep. See all the supports and.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah, it's weird.
But that old tree, which was north of Jerusalem, so he was in the vicinity of Jerusalem. About I was calculating 5 or 6 miles north of Jerusalem is where Shechem is. And that's where he first came. That's why later on they had this division between those who really worship where this old tree was, worship versus worshiping in Jerusalem, which was the holy city of David. So there's always been a little conflict in Orthodox Judaism about where is the right place, and that's
so you mean in Samaria, like the northern kingdom, the place of worship was the great tree of Mamre?
Well, yes, but I would say in Shechem. Yes, and this is in Shechem.
Wow.
So yeah, that's,
did not know that.
Yeah. So that's, and then as you go south to more toward Hebron or Bethel and Ai, I think that's where in south, and they use the word Negev a lot in the Old Testament, and that means a big valley. About half of the country of Israel is in this Negev. And it's like a big Grand Canyon, big wasteland. It's just a big valley that runs through. So Abraham goes to the Negev, and you keep hearing this a lot. So I like to drop that every chance I get, just to help people understand what does the Negev mean. It's just a big ditch.
Yeah,
supersized ditch. But in that, one of the things I will point out, he gets the call, and he responds to the call. He gets to the place where he thinks he should be. He builds an altar. Isn't that interesting? Then he goes to the next place and he builds an altar. In these first chapter or so that we're looking at, he builds a third altar. Every place he goes, it seems like he's trying to get where he wants, and he stops and pauses to build an altar. And it's almost like, God, I'm trying to get where you want me to be. I'm doing it. And at these altars, I think it's interesting. He makes what we would call, some people say, well, he sacrificed, but I love to use the word, he makes a commitment to God. I'm going to aim higher. I'm going to be what you want me to be. I'm going to go where you want me to go. And if you say walk the breadth of the land, I'm going to walk the length and breadth of the land.
And it involves sacrifice.
It does.
It's good pictures to see those altars being built, because it also says something about the importance of ritual. For when we ritualize things, we remember those significant places. Right. Easier. It etches it into our minds.
I think it's true. And the benefit of ritual, and then there's the danger of ritual.
Definitely.
To where it goes so far to where you do this without even realizing what you're doing. So
have you ever seen the, if you go on a hike, when we were in Norway, we went to this place called the Trolltung.
The tongue, yeah.
I don't think we actually went to that one. We went to a less dangerous one because we were freaked out that somebody had died like a couple of...
Arlene was so freaked out that you guys were going to go out there.
Yeah, I remember being like, I don't know, Parker. Like, do you really want to try to do this? Your mom's going to lose her mind. I'm totally concerned. Like, I don't know. So we went to this other one, and as you get up to the place where you're about to start the hike, and we went up to this glacier, there's this stone stacking ritual. Have you guys ever seen that? Mm-hmm. Where they stack stones for hikes? So here, I'll show you.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Then they do this. You can see just like miles and miles of these stones that are stacked. And it's this, for some reason, it's some sort of ritual when you go on a hike that you stack these stones.
Want to hear something crazy?
Yes.
That happens everywhere. Okay, so humanity does this. Right, so it becomes like an Ebenezer stone or a standing stone, right?
Yeah.
A remembrance of something significant.
Well, it was true when they walked through the rivers. They said take one stone for each of the tribes and make this and stack these stones up. So every time that we come back, this will be a reminder. This is where we walk through on dry ground.
Yeah.
So this thing goes way deeper.
It does.
It does. It even goes so deep. Now they've studied chimpanzees. Conducting some kind of at least some of these these scientists are saying is they've developed some concept of the sacred. They stack stones in the hollows of trees, and they beat the hollow tree. Doesn't seem to contribute anything to their survival directly, but they do it.
But there is something, as the stones, there's something significant to these large trees.
Yeah.
I mean,
that's where we lived.
I mean, in Africa, these big trees, the tree of life, they have people, they bury the kings in these trees. I mean, it's really, there's something very ritualistic about trees that can live along points of time. Plus, if you live in a desert area, it's a marker. It's like a big balloon up in the sky to let you know that's where I'm going. I'll get there. When I get there, then I remember all the stuff that's there. But stacking stones is really, I haven't really thought through that as much as I probably should.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing.
Yeah, interesting.
So getting back to this upcoming weekend, what are you kind of, what are you kind of trying to get at? What, since you can't take this whole story and do it in 25 minutes, obviously, what is going to be your big rock, so to speak?
I think that there's several things I'm going to attempt to wrestle with. And one is the process, the process, and I wrote it down here this morning. Let's see, he goes through, he leaves, and there's this call. There's this idea of, the first thing I do is get a call, and then I respond to the call, and then I somehow build an altar, or there's something that's there, that's a reminder. And someplace in there's this concept of worship that comes around. And it's really to thank God for something beyond me, and I've listened to a lot of Jordan Peterson this week. I think he's fantastic in what he's doing. I mean, the psychological analysis of what he's doing, it's not a theological analysis,
no,
and it's not a sociological analysis, but it's an excellent psychological analysis. It just gives another window into these ancient stories. It's so powerful.
Yeah, I started listening again this morning when I got up, just in preparation for this. And the problem is there's so much there. It's almost paralyzing because you can't talk about it the way that he does. You spend 20 minutes just fumbling over your words trying to get something together.
I mean, each lecture that he does is like 2.5 hours.
Yeah.
So,
and I think the Abraham story he has split up into 2 or 3.
Right. Yeah.
So it's difficult, but I think it's exactly what you said. And I had the same thought this morning, which is it's a different perspective to take on these stories. You listen to this long-winded lecture by this psychologist, and he's telling you these things that seem to be true, but from a completely different perspective than what you hear in church or what you've heard in Sunday school. Or
see, this is the value of psychoanalysis, though, because it has great what they call hermeneutic value. So this is, for interpreting these stories.
What do you mean by hermeneutic value?
It's the interpretation of.
Right.
Okay. Mm-hmm. So
it's an ongoing joke that Brett likes the word hermeneutic, and my dad likes to ask him what it means all the time. So just for the listeners,
for other words, it's Kabbalism.
Yeah. So anyway, when you go to interpret these stories, you need a frame of reference.
Exactly.
Right?
Yes.
And so our frame of reference is the creation. The deepest frame of reference that we have is human consciousness.
Right.
And psychoanalysis is about understanding that. And what we've learned through psychoanalysis these last 150 years is just has tremendous value for interpreting these stories more and more accurately, and therefore benefiting from these stories more and more.
Yeah, and I would add a little more, just the same thing you're saying, and it gives you a greater opportunity for application.
Yeah.
So you can take an ancient story like this, and I understand it now because I understand what it means to be called out. I understand what it means to be challenged, to aspire to be more. But the storyline this weekend is going to be the call, the response. I'm going to respond to the call, and after you do that, then I'm going to promise great things to you because you've done it. Mm-hmm. And just within this, there are great promises. But as you pause and reflect on this, you need to make sure you stack some stones or build an altar. So there are different points we go back to in life and say, I still remember when I started Suncoast, it was a stone stacking point in my life that I go back to and say, I moved out of this place and I aspired for something different. And at some point along the line, you begin to say, I'm so grateful for where my life is. And I'll tell the story. I read a story from Becky's dad when he was 14, and he had his first religious experience. It's a powerful story. Huh. It's not super churchy, but the story is very appropriate for where we are today.
Are you going to use that this weekend?
Mm-hmm. It's a story that's 85 years old.
Yeah,
that's family connected, and just I'm grateful he wrote it down.
Oh yeah.
So it's just and what happens to people.
I'd like to see that. Read it.
Yeah.
Here's a question for you. What is the practical way to stack stones? One thing that I've been doing that I found really beneficial, I talked about it on a podcast a couple of weeks ago, was I've been journaling again, where I try to get my thoughts and put them together in one spot, and then every time I come back to it, I kind of have these little bullet points I lay out at the end of the journal, and I look at them and I say, okay, here are the things that I want. Here are the beliefs that I'm holding that I know. Here are the things that I act like they're true, even though I know they're not true. Things about self-worth and all these things, and I can go back and I can do that. And that may be a smaller version. It's not something as monumental as starting the organization that will outlive you. It's not as big as that, but it is something that you're constantly, daily able to go back and remember where you were and to refocus and gain that perspective.
I agree. And I for me, it was, you don't know what's going to happen until you look back. But at some point in 21 years ago, I was in chaos. Yeah. I cannot use any word to describe it. It's emotional because you're just lost. Yeah. And then all of a sudden there's order that comes in. You get a vision of what can be. You clean up your room, as Peterson would say, right. And you aim for the highest, best good you can, and you do the very best. You focus your life on that, and I'm going to live that way. And one of the fun things about Suncoast, and I mean, I use the word fun because it's liberating, is to say we're going to live our lives according to this principle, not according to some static beliefs that have been around the church for a long time, because beliefs do not... your lifestyle and the way you live. Abraham didn't have a lot of statement of belief. He didn't have a bunch of statements of faith. He didn't have the church as his predecessor. He simply stepped out and aimed for higher and walked with God, as did Noah, and as did Adam too in the beginning, and as have many reformers and church leaders throughout history. But it's not within the confines of a little cell or a little box. It's those who step out. And I love the concept. We talked about this in companies and business years ago, but some people have great ideas, but it's the people who step out and make those ideas happen. And then there's a book called Making Ideas Happen. It really is tremendously different, because I can say, I believe all these things, but if you don't step out and live according to that, you've not really achieved the full part of your life that you can.
There's the sermon.
Exactly. And journaling is simply that time of reflection to where you realize, because if I don't reflect, how in the world, am I ever going to know where I want to go?
Yeah.
If I get up every day and I can't see the forest for the trees, I'm rushing, my alarm's going off, and I'm late for everything. And tomorrow I do the same thing, and the same thing, and I wonder why I don't have any trajectory in my life. Is because I've not taken time to back off and see where I want to go and aspire to do that. And Brett, you're doing that even with your schooling now. You say this is important to me. I'm gonna aspire to do this while I'm doing this, right? It's true with so many different things. You've got your hand in so many aspirations, but even this building we're in now is an aspiration of somebody that says what could happen. And what we're doing with this podcast is, it's part of let's aim higher. Let's do this the best we possibly can. And that's true in all our lives, whether you're an engineer or whether you're a car salesman or, whether you work at Walmart or wherever.
Yeah. Be
the best version of you that you can be and aspire for greatness. And if you don't like where you are, then change it.
Yep.
I mean, take some steps to change it. I taught about this a couple of years ago, and after I said, if you don't like the way your movie ends, then change the story. If you don't like the way it's going, change your trajectory. And I had two families that moved away from Suncoast, North Carolina. They said, this is not our future.
Yeah.
And that sermon has challenged us to
leave your church.
We're going to leave your church.
You might want to rethink that whole thing. I don't know.
I know. Well, I know.
What have I done?
Yeah, and the ones that do that are the ones that you want to keep.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. Yeah.
They're the most valuable. But I think that is a challenge for all of us to aspire to something more. Now, as I read through the story, I think the funny parts are, you get to Canaan. Finally get there. Man, the aspiration, I aimed high. I've gotten there. As soon as I get there, there's a famine.
Yeah.
Well, what is that about? I mean, I got to go to Egypt to get some food. I just spent my whole life getting here, and now I can't stay here.
That seems like it's just the biblical narrative over and over again, though. I mean, Moses, the poor guy, and Joseph, all these guys, but you're so close yet so far.
But isn't that life?
That's life, exactly.
Yeah.
Isn't that where we
life.
are too? I mean, just when you think you get there, you realize this is not everything I wanted.
Right.
And the timing doesn't always work out.
Then the famine forces him to go down to the tyrannical rule of the Pharaoh.
Yes.
Yeah, and then we'll get into that another day. Because he's got a lot of issues there too.
Yeah.
But
all right, so we're going to talk about this weekend. We're coming up on 30 minutes, so let's that's a good place to end, I think.
Yeah.
All right, sounds good. Thanks.
All right, we'll see you guys this weekend.